Hello and welcome to another episode of All Politics is Local. I'm your host, John Tian. All Politics is Local is a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. To learn more about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, please visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. We've got a great show planned for you today. We have a candidate for the 18th Worcester District, the state rep seat that is in the 18th Worcester District, David Cortese. Welcome, David.
Thank you, John.
How are you today?
I'm very well. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you, including All Politics is Local, as a campaign stop while you're out on the trail. It's great to have you here. So tell us a little bit about your district. What's the 18th Worcester all about? 4 towns,
Sutton, Douglas, Webster, and 2 precincts in Oxford comprises the 18th Worcester District.
Okay, and what are the what's going on with the district? We've got a primary coming up in the fall.
We have a primary coming up in the fall. There are 3 Democratic candidates, and we have the general election in November.
Okay, and so you're obviously hoping to win the primary and be on that general election ballot come November.
I am, yes.
All right, terrific. So let's talk a little bit about your background and what qualifies you for this state rep seat.
Okay. Retired from the state police just about 2 years ago in 2012 after a 27-year career. I spent a lot of that career. It was virtually all here in central Massachusetts in Worcester County. I worked out of the Holden Barracks. I worked on the community action team. We got out and into the communities working with the local police departments. I was also very strong in the union. I was a member of the executive board of the union for more than a decade, and I had quite a bit of union experience, and along with that comes quite a bit of legislative experience, getting bills authored, getting bills passed, and pushing things through the legislature that benefit not only the members of the union that I served at the time, but the public as well.
Okay, terrific, terrific. And since your retirement from the state police, what have you been doing?
I'm an attorney. I have a private practice up in Worcester. I attended law school back while I was still on the state police at night. Out at Western New England. I passed the bar in 2011, just about a year before I retired, and I've got, I guess I would say, a budding practice up in Worcester right now.
Well, that's terrific, and that can't be an easy thing to do, to attend law school evenings. That's a tough row to hoe, right?
I enjoyed it, but it's not an experience I'd wish to repeat. I can tell you that it was draining.
Yeah, never easy, especially when you get to be kind of towards our age, right? I mean,
exactly.
Teaching the old dog new tricks. Do you have a strong union background then with your work in the state police? Would you say that you do?
Yes, I'm a strong labor supporter. In addition to my work with the union of the state police, I was active in a group called the National Troopers Coalition. It's a coalition of 30-odd states, state police agencies, their unions, and we tried to push issues and move issues on a national level, federal legislation and things like that.
Okay, tell us a little bit more about that. What states did you work with? What kind of issues did you cover?
We worked with a lot of states, primarily labor issues, some public safety issues. I can remember working some of the states, as you know, in the South and the West, are probably not as labor friendly as what we're used to up here in the Northeast. And we would work very hard to try to get those states included more or less in the labor movement, and try to get them more of the rights that I think more or less we take for granted up here in the Northeast.
Okay, yeah, there is a strong union background here in the Northeast. I can attest to that. My dad was an IBEW electrician.
Okay.
So I was raised on union food, and it didn't do me poorly. So, yeah, very, very strong union tradition here in the Northeast. But like you say, there's other areas of the country where it's not quite so strong. But it's.
You hear the terms right-to-work legislation and right-to-work states, and the euphemism, bandied about in labor circles is right-to-work for less.
Right.
A lot of those states, primarily south and west of us here in the Northeast, there is no right to unionize. Sometimes that applies to all employees. Sometimes it applies to public employees, such as members of different police agencies.
Yeah, yeah. I remember there was just recently there was a big flap about the Volkswagen plant in the UAW.
Yes.
Down in Tennessee, right? Wasn't that where it was?
It was, I believe it was in Tennessee. It was in the South. It was traditionally probably not an area that you would think of as a strong labor area. But then you think of the auto industry, and you do think of that as you know, a labor bastion. There's a lot of labor representation there.
Sure.
And the idea was to model that on a European plan or a German plan of labor councils. But unfortunately, the proposal was voted down.
Well, that's the thing too. I mean, in Germany, they do have those labor councils. The union has representation on the board. And you know, it makes sense because the workers are well represented, and the workers are very happy with their jobs. You know, it's a virtuous cycle rather than a vicious cycle.
I think the idea is with that model, and it should be with the labor model, and I've always tried to adhere to this, is that management and labor can work together on most issues. Most of those issues, you probably have a goal in common, or you have some goals in common. And if you can apply a little bit of negotiating, or bargaining skills, and a little bit of give and take, which there should definitely be, management and labor can come out ahead of the game, and so can, in the private sector, the consumer, the customer, the stockholder, shareholder, and in the public sector, it would be the public that comes out ahead.
Sure. And as far as state police unions are concerned, do you do anything? I know that in my dad's case, in the electricians union, there was a lot of workplace safety stuff that went on as far as union is concerned. Do you do much of that with the state police unions?
There's a safety committee, matter of fact, established by the contract between the job and the union, and I served on that for a while. We would look at workplace safety issues, and I have to say I found, you know, that probably one of the most rewarding things we did is, you know, having the safety issues and trying to address them.
Sure, and you know, as far as our state police is concerned, I would love to see safety first and foremost. I mean, those guys put their lives on the line every day. And,
absolutely.
And really, they need to be safe in their jobs.
Right.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the issues as you see them. There's some statewide issues obviously going on, and there's also probably some stuff district-wide that you're concerned about or that you feel needs to be addressed, and hence why you're running for the seat. Let's talk about some of the issues.
I think one of the primary issues, it's a statewide issue, but it also hits any place in the district or in this area of Massachusetts here, is the minimum wage issue. Yep. There are two competing proposals in the State House, one from the House side, one from the Senate side. They both essentially do the same basics. The Senate bill would raise the minimum wage over 3 years to $11 per hour from the current $8 an hour, and it would index it to inflation. So that we wouldn't have to go back and revisit it on a regular basis. With inflation or the lack thereof, the minimum wage would go up and down. The House bill is probably somewhat simpler. The House bill raises the minimum wage to, I believe, $10.50 per hour over just about the same 3-year period, but there is no index to inflation in that bill.
Well, yeah, the thing about the indexing to inflation is if you don't have that in the bill, then we're doing this again.
Exactly.
A couple of years down the road. As soon as inflation erodes that earning capacity of a minimum wage, you know, to my mind, we really don't need a minimum wage. What we need is a living wage. People need to make enough money to be able to, you know, to support themselves, to have a decent home, to have decent food on the table for their kids. I mean, people need that, and we really do need something to correct a lot of the imbalance that we see these days.
I think so. I think, John, when you look at the minimum wage as it stands now, $8 an hour, it's very difficult for a family of any size to be able to support any kind of family and put food on the table, and as you said, housing costs and you know, costs associated with getting to work, transportation costs. It's very difficult to do that with a minimum wage set the way it is. There hasn't been a change in the minimum wage in the state for, I believe, 6 years, since 2008. And when you look at the polls and the other data coming in, 70% of Americans are in favor of an increase in the minimum wage. And that goes back to the federal minimum wage, which is only $7.25 an hour right now, significantly less than ours is here in Massachusetts. And you'll hear some of the arguments from business and everything that it's going to make some services unaffordable or less affordable, and it's going to make products unaffordable. And I direct people, if you look at the state of Washington, they've had a minimum wage of over $10 an hour for a number of years now. And when you do the survey, when you look at products that you can easily compare from state to state, products and services in Washington state don't cost significantly more, or really any more than they do in other states, even though the workers there are making a much better wage than they are in Massachusetts. Sure,
and you know, we look at things like where do the jobs come from? Who are the job creators? I saw a very interesting TED Talk with a guy named Nick Hanauer a while ago. He's a billionaire. His family owned a pillow factory, and he has parlayed that pillow factory into a fortune, and he really has made a fortune. He talked about who the real job creators are, and he pointed out that consumer demand is really the only thing that creates jobs. Businesses don't hire unless there's demand for their products.
When you look at what the other side might claim, that is, if you're going to try to inject some life into the economy, some money in the economy, they're going to talk about tax breaks. The tax breaks, especially at the corporate level, they're going to not necessarily inject money, but they're going to give you a break at the top. But that's a corporate tax break. If you give, and this follows Henry Ford's dictum when he had, when he began,
Sure.
Pay your employees enough that they can buy your own product, and,
Right.
and you get your money back.
Right.
I think that's shown here. If you are going to inject some money in the economy, if you inject it at the bottom, at the lowest level, the minimum wage worker, all of that money is going to get spent. It's going to get spent in the retail sector.
Sure.
If you think of people that don't have a lot of cash, that don't have a lot of money, that are working at the minimum wage, if you give them any kind of raise at all, that money is going to get spent. It's going to get spent on groceries. It's going to get spent on gasoline. It's going to get spent on clothing and things like that. It's going to get spent in the retail sector, and you get more bang for your buck that way.
Absolutely, yeah. You look at things like what are the most economically stimulative things that we can do. Moody's, the investment firm, did a study, and they said, well, if we do a tax cut, for every dollar in tax cut that we return to the populace, we get $1.02 of increased economic activity. So yes, tax cuts are stimulative, but they're only marginally stimulative. You want to know where you get your best bang for your buck as far as injecting money in the economy? Food stamps.
Food stamps.
For every dollar you spend on food stamps, you get $1.72 in economic activity.
I read one of the financial magazines, I can't recall which one it was, but it certainly had a right-leaning bias in the article, and it was an anti-minimum wage article. And in the article they stated that raising the minimum wage, and this wasn't specific to Massachusetts, it was more a reflection on the national bill pending before Congress, raising the minimum wage would only take low-wage earners and would only inject an extra $85 to $144 per week. And the article talked about that as being insignificant, and it wouldn't specifically increase that family's buying power. And I thought that showed how out of touch the author of that article was.
Sure.
If you take a poor family struggling to get by with one breadwinner, one wage earner making minimum wage, and even if both of them were making minimum wage and there were a number of children in the family, an extra $144 a week, I don't think a whole lot of people in the district that would be anything for them to sneeze at.
That's well over $7,000 a year.
Right.
Just think of the increased tax collection because these people are making money now. There's extra money for the government to pour more money into the
That's a good
economy.
point. Not only are you increasing the retail sector, in our district, in our area here, but you're also increasing the tax base as well.
Sure.
Directly or indirectly.
It seems like there was a time in this country when we had what was called the virtuous cycle. I'm sorry, I just saw Robert Reich's Inequality for All
Yes.
over the weekend. Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, we did a screening of Inequality for All at the Milford Library on Saturday. And in that one, he talks about the virtuous cycle where tax collections are up and that money is used to build infrastructure. And those infrastructure dollars flow into the economy. Again, Moody's talked about if you spend $1 on infrastructure projects, it results in $1.58 of increased economic activity. And so when the tax collections are up and we spend that on infrastructure, the infrastructure money flows into the economy, people's wages go up, causing taxes to go up, tax collections to go up, and the whole cycle just keeps on going. We broke that cycle back around 1978, and it's been broken ever since, and that's part of the problem that we have. People talk about our government having a revenue problem, having a spending problem. We really don't have a spending problem. We have a revenue problem. There isn't enough revenue to continue to fund the government in the proper way.
When you look at the government, and obviously working in the state government for 27 years, I feel I have a fair amount of experience on how things are done. I'm obviously familiar with the legislative process. I'm familiar with the bidding process. I worked in a section of the state police on and off for years where they bought cruisers and vehicles, and I'm familiar with the bid process and things like that. I think you can go into any system, and there's always some place you can cut. And there are always ways to find things that are excessive. But you have to do it in such a way that it's a surgical cut and it's not an across-the-board cut to a complete account or a complete area of state spending. You talked about infrastructure a minute. You talk about roads and bridges. Those are things that build jobs. They build industry, okay? We have 146 running through the eastern half of the district I hope to represent, and it's been a true engine to this economy down here. Sutton and Douglas have certainly profited, and indirectly I think the rest of the district will have as well. I can remember when I started out here in the state police a long time ago, 146 was more or less a country road, and it didn't support, say, the commercial traffic and the commuting, say, from Rhode Island to Massachusetts to Central Mass that it does now. So when you look at your tax dollars being spent on building roads, you know, you win on so many levels. You're providing jobs, you're providing an infrastructure. Certainly you're increasing property values, whether they're commercial or residential property values. But that is, I think, the engine that basically gets commercial activity going, even if it's just commuting. If someone says, well, there's a job in Worcester I'd like to take, and it's too much of a ride if it's a backcountry road, but if there's a highway that's in good shape, that's maintained, that's a job I'll look at taking.
Right, a highway where they can get decent gas mileage because they don't have to stop every couple of hundred yards, and they can just cruise right on down there at 55 miles an hour and be to work on time. Sure, that makes a huge difference.
Hopefully 55 miles an hour.
Being the state policeman, we keep them at, what is it, I Can't Drive 55, is that the song?
Sammy Hagar, yes. Yeah.
We got to be careful of that, right?
Yeah, right.
So let's talk a little bit more about some other issues. Local aid is a big one. Tell us your thoughts on local aid.
Local aid is a difficult issue for, obviously for local officials. In 1983, we passed Proposition 2.5, and from that day, we really limited local officials' ability to raise revenue, okay, and to control their own budgets, and it's become more and more difficult. They get more and more dependent on local aid from the state. And we can talk about the amounts in a minute, and that's fine, but the other thing that happens a lot of time is the timing. It's dependent on the state budget. That's a political process. If the state budget is delayed for any reason, the town officials are more or less sitting and waiting. They're deciding how much money we're going to receive for Chapter 70 for schools, how much money we're going to receive Chapter 90 to do road and bridge repairs and things like that. So the towns are more or less bound to this. They're bound to this schedule that comes out of Boston, and that's difficult. I think we need to look at ways to nail that schedule down, to get that schedule more or less entrenched, so that there's a way that the local officials understand when it's coming, and they can build their budgets around that. And I realize there's a framework there, but it probably needs to be tightened up. And when you look at the amounts that are coming out, you have to realize that cities and towns, especially in our district, which is largely rural, they're dependent on this funding, okay? And Absolutely. They don't have a lot of other options to raise funds. You look at Boston, and Boston has a hotel tax, and obviously they're gonna raise much more money from, say, a meals tax or anything like that.
Sure, because they have the hotel rooms, they have the
hotels, and they have the restaurants, obviously. Yeah. So that the mayor of Boston, the city council in Boston, they have much more ways to raise revenue, I should say, than the cities and towns in our district.
Sure, much greater flexibility out there when you have all that other stuff, all those other means of raising revenue for the town. Yeah, absolutely. So, were there any Proposition 2.5 battles in your district that concerned you in the last couple of years?
There have been several, and in my own hometown of Douglas, there have been two in the past few years, and they kind of illustrate, I guess you say, the difference. The first one, a new school needed to be built, the middle school needed to be built, and it's quite a project. It's almost done. My children go there now, so I get to see it on a regular basis. Excellent. And they've done a wonderful job. And there was an override for that. It added to people's property tax bills. It probably added several $100s a year for a period of, I think, a minimum of 10 years, if I remember right. And my recollection of the situation was there wasn't a whole lot of people that spoke out against it. I think they saw the need for the school system. They saw the need for the capital improvement. There was a significant influx of state money in that one, too. It's a green school. Yep. And I don't think that there was really a lot of organized resistance to it. That was a few years ago. Last year, 2013, there was another override floated. That one was a little bit different. That one was to cover more or less operational costs. Police department's cruisers, and I can tell you from my experience, they weren't in the place they needed to be. Okay, the vehicles, the police department in general, the amount of officers we have a wonderful police department in Douglas, but they're underfunded, and they need more funding. And that goes for the fire department, and I know it goes for the schools as well. And you know that when local budgets are cut, John, one of the first things that gets cut is labor cost, and the first thing that gets cut is the person who's providing services. And if you look at the big three, the police, fire, and teachers, if you lose teachers, you're talking about a bigger class size. If you lose police officers and firefighters, you're talking about increased response times.
Or public safety.
Public safety, exactly. And increased response time, as we've seen so often, seconds can save lives, and certainly in the issue of firefighters, seconds can cost you property damage and a lot of money as well, even if lives aren't on the line. to float an override for an operating budget, I think it shows you that there's something wrong, okay?
There's something structurally
There's
wrong
something
here.
structurally wrong.
Yeah.
And if we are having to float overrides every so often just to cover our operating budgets, I think that's something we need to look at. We need to look at ways that we can address that.
Okay. Before I forget, if people wanted to find out more about your candidacy, do you have a website or a Facebook page or anything like that?
I have
that you can
both.
send them to? You do? Okay.
Elect David Cortese on Facebook, and the website would be votedavidcortez.com.
Okay, and would you spell it too, just to make sure that people know the spelling on it?
My last name is Cortese.
Okay, great. Okay, so let's see, what else we got? You wanted to talk a little bit about entitlements and welfare, existing rule enforcement, really, or what's your opinion there?
I think that's what we need with welfare and entitlements. We need more enforcement. I don't follow the idea that we should throw the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. Is there fraud in the welfare system? Absolutely. I think we all know there is. There have been some cases that have been publicized, and rightfully so, they should be. And when you look at someone who's stealing, okay, who's taking money, committing fraud that they're not entitled to from any kind of welfare system, whether it's the EBT system or anything else, that person is stealing twice. He's stealing from you and I and everyone else as taxpayers because we fund that system. And he's also stealing a much-needed dollar or a much-needed benefit from someone who truly needs it. He's taking that money or that benefit, at least in my eyes, away from someone who truly needs the benefit. And I think it's something we need to crack down on, and I don't think a lot of enforcement is being done. The way I'd like to see it addressed, we need to look at ways to get the local and the state police involved in this. There's no one organization right now that I'm aware of that is investigating EBT fraud or anything like that, at least on a law enforcement level. I know that the EBT people, they have their own investigators, but if you were to move that work or make that work available to your local police officers, your state police officers as well, your agencies that are already in place and do investigations, fraud investigations, larceny investigations, things like that.
Sure, and it is larceny at the end of the day.
It is larceny at the end of the day. If you're receiving benefits and you're not entitled to them, that's larceny, and that's generally what the person is charged with, is some form of larceny by scheme or a charge like that. Mm-hmm. But if you take that work should be done at the local level, and it should be done by trained police officers. They know the people involved. They know, basically, they can talk to people in the community. They're going to maybe hear who is defrauding the system. And it can be defrauded really at both ends, the person, more or less the consumer, and also some of the retail outlets, okay, we're giving cash back for benefits, which is prohibited and things like that. And what I'd like to see is, let's see if we can set up a way where the state supports these efforts. Let's see if we can find a way with the local police, the state police, our existing law enforcement agencies can go to the state for financial help and for logistical help. Mm-hmm. If they can get access to the system if they need that, and access to the information they need to do those investigations. And at the end of the day, we're talking about, in my district, 4 towns, these are cash-strapped police departments. I know that from my experience. If they're going to engage in these investigations, it would be nice if they could apply to the state for some financial help to cover their personnel costs.
Absolutely. Okay. One of the things that's been done recently as far as welfare reform is concerned was addition of pictures to the EBT
Yes.
cards. That has been passed, correct?
It has been passed. I don't know if it's being done in practice yet, but I know that the legislation, or I read that the legislation had been passed.
Yeah, in practice, I'm not sure just how that's going to work or how it's going to be effective. When you give EBT benefits, you're really giving them to a family. Right. And if there's one family member pictured on that card, that means that person has to do all the grocery shopping for the family. It doesn't seem to make sense to me as to how this is going to help.
In that particular instance, I think you're correct. And the other thing to look at is you're making retailers, you're making a cashier or whatever.
Sure,
you're turning them into the enforcement arm.
Yeah.
And if they're not able, willing, or for whatever reason, they're just not equipped to make that determination. Mm-hmm. Again, this is a determination I think that should be made by law enforcement, okay?
Right.
Not the retailer and not someone involved in state government with no law enforcement experience.
Right, and I look at my own picture on my license, I don't think I look like that. So maybe I was having a bad day. I don't know. They renew it around my birthday, and I'm always thinking, gee, I'm old.
I just renewed mine, and I know now they don't even require you every
yeah,
license renewal to get your picture.
So
you can wind up with a fairly old picture on your license,
right,
a fairly aged picture,
yeah.
right?
And then there's always the case of there was a woman in Florida who wore a burqa and didn't want to take the veil off for her license picture. So,
Correct.
Now are we going to get into those types of issues as well? And again, also as far as those pictures are concerned, to my understanding, there's an enormous cost for putting the pictures on there. How much fraud are we really rooting out with that enormous cost?
You know,
I don't know if it's cost effective to do so.
I don't know if it's cost effective, but I think it certainly does, John. It gives the public a little bit more confidence and faith in the system. And I think at least that's a step in the right direction. You see an awful lot of publication, an awful lot of fraud. I'd like to believe, I have some charity background myself. I do volunteer at a food pantry along with my wife in Douglas. We spend a fair amount of time there. Matter of fact, I just came from there before I came to this taping. There are a lot of people in need. You can blame the economy. We can talk about that all night. There are a lot of people in need, and they're in true need. If they weren't things like entitlements, if there weren't things like food banks and food pantries and things like that, people would legitimately, genuinely go hungry. That's not where we want to be as a society. I don't think anyone wants that to happen. The question is, how do you get there? When you look at some of the publication of some of the frauds or alleged frauds, it would make you believe that the whole system is racked with fraud. I don't believe that, and perhaps I'm being naive, but I don't believe that. My own experience has shown me that the vast majority of people that are receiving benefits probably need them, they have fit the criteria, and they should be getting benefits. If by putting pictures on those cards we can restore some public confidence in the system, then I think it's probably an investment that's well made.
Okay, well, thanks for your opinion on that. That's it's a great and well thought out opinion.
Well, thank you.
Tell us a little more about your public safety background and how you would address public safety in the district as the state rep.
Public safety is, I think, one of those things. There's a joke I'm trying to think about a parachute. When you need it, you really, really need it. And I think public safety is like that to a lot of people. I think they look at it with a jaundiced eye. I have never, certainly while living in the district, have needed to have the fire department come to my house to put out a fire, but I understand the need for them to be there at the other end of the phone when I call 911 and to have the best equipment and the best training. We can't let that fall by the wayside, and I think sometimes it's easy to do. We've seen as we tape this, we've had 2 tragedies in the past week or so. We lost 2 Boston firefighters, and we lost a motorcycle police officer in Plymouth. I was on the motorcycles on the state police for a number of years as well, so that strikes obviously close to me when I see that happening. We need to support our public safety people, and we need to support them all the time. It's nice to see the outpouring of support at a time like this when more or less police and fire are down. They've been kicked and they're down due to their losses. But sometimes that support fades away. And, you know, over the course of a lifetime, I truly hope most people don't have to call 911 in an emergency basis.
Right, in any emergency,
But they probably will sooner or later. If they're in an accident on the highway in conjunction with my former employment, if they have a problem at their home, if they have a fire at their home or a medical emergency, we need to keep them with the latest equipment. We need to keep them well-staffed. And a lot of people talk about pay and unit benefits and things like that. But when you think about it, especially in a town, you know, keeping the benefits and the pay rate high keeps your officers, firefighters, and EMTs, it keeps them in your town. And they're not using your town or your department as a stepping stone to go somewhere else. So when you look at that, when you look at the fact that your public servants have gotten a raise, that's an investment in your future, okay? If we can keep those people there, if we can keep them well-trained, well-equipped, I think that's going to be a priority of mine. I think it goes without saying we need to stand behind them.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and like you say, I've never had an opportunity to have to call the police department to come into a fire at my house. But at the same time, I belong to a club out here in Milford called Drinking Liberally. I don't know if you've ever heard of Drinking Liberally. It's a really fun organization.
Sounds like it.
We're actually it's actually a worldwide organization. There are chapters all over the world of Drinking Liberally. There's 8 chapters here in Massachusetts, and Milford has one. We go to the Turtle Tavern right downtown Milford, which is next to Town Hall and actually across the street from the fire station. And so I tend to spend a little bit of time there. We're there the 2nd and 4th Wednesday every month, and we go there at 6:30 at night, and we stay until the last person leaves. You know, sitting there across the street from the fire department, those guys are in and out of there all the time with their lights on. It's not a matter of, yes, I personally have never called them, but they're going out all the time. They are constantly busy, and it's something that, you know, you really see the need for public safety, infrastructure like that. When you see them going in and out of that building all the time, and I'm serious, it's constant. It's twice, 3 times during the couple hours that I'm there on Wednesday night, they're going in and out.
I think in this day and age, we're asking more and more from our public safety people post 9/11 and the terrorism age and everything that comes down societally a lot of times, and it seems to land in the lap of public safety kind of at the end of the pipeline, and it's one more thing that police, fire, and EMTs have to do. And I don't think you're going to find any town anywhere around here, and certainly not in this district, where call volume for departments is down or anything like that.
Right.
Call volume is up. The amount of work you have to do is up. The amount of paperwork, I can tell you, as any kind of law enforcement officer, is up.
Yep.
The work gets harder and the calls get more frequent.
What do you think about things like consolidating 911 call response centers across towns?
You look at that, and I think that's had mixed reviews in Massachusetts. I've read some articles, and I've talked to some former colleagues and some people, and there are some bumps in the road. You look at it, and you have to weigh the pluses and the minuses. The plus is that it certainly can save money, and every dollar you save there is one that can be freed up to hire another officer or put another firefighter out on the road or on a fire truck or things like that. On the other hand, if you have several towns that are served by one dispatch center, say in a storm, you're talking about probably an overwhelming call volume, okay, in a storm or any kind of large incident or anything like that. And you're also possibly addressing issues of people that aren't as familiar with some of the towns that they now dispatch for as they may have been for their own town that they worked in for years.
Sure. Yeah, if it's their own town somewhere that they grew up, they know the town better, et cetera. Yeah, so there's a good cross-section, I guess, of how we should look at those and how we should address those kind of issues.
Exactly.
Should we consolidate or not? How about labor and union issues in the district? What do you see as the future of labor in the district?
I mean, I think the future of labor is still very robust. I'm a strong believer in labor, and I talk and I compare. We're in 2014, and you look at the birthplace of American labor. Probably 110 years or so ago was when we were first having that fight. And you look at sweatshops and things like that. And a lot of times when you look at a lot of the labor issues, you look at the way the economy it is now, it seems as if the middle class is getting squeezed out. It seems of those of us who identified with being in the middle class are getting either squeezed down or squeezed up. The labor market is controlled, I think, by the employer right now. Employees have very, very little control of the labor market. And I think labor unions in general, and probably by design, have from certain elements in our society, have gotten a very, very bad reputation. Labor unions exist to protect workers' rights, to make sure workers are properly paid, to make sure that the law is followed. I can tell you that from my studies of labor law and my observation and a little bit of work in labor law and my career as an attorney, there are an awful lot of employers that just disregard labor laws and wait for the enforcement to come. I think right now all the momentum of the emphasis is with the employer, and employees have very, very little bargaining power. And that goes back to the minimum wage we discussed earlier, okay? It is very, very difficult to get a raise from an employer in a market like this when so many people, unemployment is high and so many people are hungry for jobs. It is difficult to get your employer to agree to a higher wage, and I think that's where a union comes in.
Sure. The collective bargaining really makes a big difference for
does.
people, absolutely. And you look at this district, there's such a rich history out here.
Yes.
The foundation of the Industrial Revolution in America is right here.
Yes.
The first river-powered factory was built right on the Blackstone River. I mean,
Yes.
it's amazing. That's why I love the name of our organization, the Greater Blackstone Valley. I mean, it's really rich and steeped in history. So it really is just a wonderful district to be in. Let's talk just a little bit more about the district again now. It is the 18th Worcester District that you're
Yes,
running for?
correct.
Tell me
Yes.
the towns, et cetera, and give us your website again.
Sutton, Douglas, all of Webster, and precincts 1 and 4 in Oxford. My website is votedavidcortese.com.
Okay, and the spelling is Cortese.
That is correct, John, yes.
Okay, terrific. And people can find you on Facebook as well. I imagine you're doing things around the district as well. Do you have any upcoming events that you want to let people know
I don't have
about?
any events scheduled right now. I've been doing a number of standouts. We've had some events. We've done events in all the towns. I've gotten great positive feedback.
Terrific.
You will probably see me standing at an intersection near you, probably on a weekend morning, if you haven't already. I get my children to come out and hold signs up with me and my wife and the other members of my campaign committee. They're all very enthusiastic. They're behind this 100%.
Great.
I have two boys. They're 11 and 12, almost 11 and 12. And I must have done something right along the way, John. They actually enjoy coming out and holding signs up.
There you go.
They're not above extorting some kind of bribe out of their father for the work, but they do enjoy it and they have fun.
I remember them from our Greater Blackstone Valley St. Patrick's Day breakfast.
Yes.
They were a lot of fun there. They were out holding signs in the parking lot for
Right,
you,
yes.
trying to alert people to pull in here for the breakfast. And,
Right.
that was a great event. We had a good time there that day. A good crowd, real
Yes.
good turnout. I was really proud of the way that turned out.
Good
That
crowd,
was-
good speakers. That was a very enjoyable event, yeah.
Yeah, it really was. That
Yeah.
was a good time. Let's go back a little bit to that National Troopers Coalition that you talked about.
Yes.
You said at one point that you had some legislative experience in there. Can you expand on that a little
We
bit?
did. We worked on some issues. We worked on what's called the Law Enforcement Safety Act, Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, I'm sorry. And what it does is it allows police officers to remain armed even when they're not in their home state for their own personal protection. And that was one piece of legislation that we worked on that benefited our members, all of our members. And I think it benefits the public as well. Having that many more police officers available in the event of some kind of crisis like that is certainly something that's going to benefit the public. We worked on other things. I can remember going down to Alabama, and we went down there for a meeting. And in Alabama, certainly the labor background and the way public employees are treated and compensated is certainly very different. And we went to the State House in Alabama, and we had conversations with legislative leaders down there. And it's really illuminating. You're talking about basically a right-to-work state, and you're talking about a state where public employees are not allowed to unionize and collectively bargain for wages and benefits. And you see the difference. I mean, police officers, public safety people in the South are in those areas are paid far less than their compatriots up here. And we're able to work with the officials in Alabama on that one occasion, and we're able to reach an agreement. The troopers in Alabama received a wage increase and received some relief from some more or less onerous work requirements and things like that. And we were able to do that by helping out, negotiating, and kind of contrasting and comparing how we did things here and how things had always been done in that state.
Okay. Any other legislative issues you worked on? Did you do anything at the federal level within that
We did some
organization?
things at the federal level. We looked at certainly issues after 9/11 and things like that. It was more or less weighing in on more issues that had been filed either pro or against, where we stood as law enforcement. Most of them are public safety initiatives. They're to increase the public safety, and we would at least have a seat at the table, and we would at least talk to whoever was the proponent of the bill and weigh in on either pro or con on the bill.
Okay. So you're practicing attorney. Tell us a little bit about your practice. How's that going?
It's going very well. It's going much better actually than I would have expected, to be blunt. I've been practicing for about 2.5 years. I passed the bar right after I got out of law school. And I call myself a generalist. I'm trying to still learn every aspect of the trade. I've done quite a bit of work. I've appeared in a lot of courts, and it's fun. It's fun learning a new trade, and it's particularly for me. It's different, let's say, being on the other side.
Sure.
I was in law enforcement for almost 30 years, and being on the other side and seeing how it appears from a defense attorney's perspective, it's eye-opening, to say the least.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. I know that a lot of the stuff that I've done around here in Milford has also been eye-opening, like you say.
Yes.
I started myself on a political path by joining town meeting. I
Right.
got myself elected to town meeting. I think it was back in 2006, 2007, somewhere around that time frame. And yeah, it's illuminating when you see things from a new perspective. It really is just a great thing. So you've got the primary coming up in September,
Yes.
the general election in November. Like you said, you've got 3 people running on the Democratic side. Are there people running on the Republican side as well?
There are 2 declared Republicans as well, yes. So
Okay.
they will have a primary on the Republican side
There's
as
a
well.
primary there on that side as
Yes.
well. Let's talk a little bit more about, local aid. Do you want to talk anything about school funding or anything like that across the district? Are you familiar with Chapter 70? You did mention, you touched on it briefly before.
Right. I'm familiar with the basics of Chapter 70. I mean, we need to keep our school funding. I know in a lot of towns, when you look at it, it's the dinosaur. It's the big issue in local funding.
Sure.
And it's the one that probably local officials struggle with the most. But arguably, it's at least as important or as important as public safety. I mean, we're talking about the future of our kids here. And we all know that class size is a huge issue. And if we don't get the funding we need at the local level, inevitably what seems to happen is the people that provide the services, in the case of the school system teachers, they seem to be the first to go in a lot of circumstances. And if you do that, you not only lose that pool of talent, they're familiar with the local town, they're familiar with the families and the children, but you're inevitably talking about an increase in class size. And when you talk about an increase in class size, I think we all know that basically that's less attention from the teacher. The teacher's going to have a more difficult time keeping up with the wants and needs of that many more individual students, and I think the system suffers as a result.
Sure, sure. You know, and people talk about, well, you know, why should I care about the school system? I don't have any kids in school. You know, there's always a good answer for that. Well, you know, you're going to need some services somewhere down the road. You're going to need a plumber who can measure and estimate what the job is going to cost. You're going to need an electrician. You may need a doctor. You want to talk about somebody who needs an education. Well, you know, there's a person right there who really needs an education. So
we're becoming more and more of a professional society, and I think it's short-sighted to think that, you know, if you don't have any children in the school system right at that particular time, over time it's going to affect you. In a community, it's going to affect you. The level of education, you look at it one way that's direct as it affects property values. People who search for houses search out towns where they think that the educational system is excellent. So if you have two towns, one with a school system with a great reputation and the other one with a school system with a not so great reputation, you're going to see a difference in property values. So there's one way you get a bang for your buck for your educational money right there.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's talk a little bit more about local aid. Where would you go with local aid?
As I said, we need to streamline how it gets handed out, and by how I mean on the timeline. The timeline needs to get really, really locked down as to allow the town to build upon that, okay? And because legislation that was passed, I think by voter initiative, if I'm correct, back in '83, Prop 2.5, it's locked the towns in. The towns out here don't have a lot of other ways to raise money. And I know we're past 128 out here, and I know we're not in the power belt in Massachusetts out here in central Massachusetts and in Worcester County, especially the farther you get away from Worcester. But I think we need someone who's going to fight for our fair share, our fair share of the tax dollar as it goes to the town, through local aid, certainly through school funding, and every other tax dollar that flows through the state back here. And I think I'm equipped to do that. I think I'll be able to do that, and I'd like to do that, to get our fair share and maybe some more for this district.
Right. So one of the things that I talk about, you know, what I was talking about earlier about how it's an eye-opener to even just participate in town meeting, the budget.
Yes.
You know, the town budget it's usually the first 3 or 4 articles on the warrant,
Right.
and there's a lot of money there.
Right.
You know, there sure is. And you know, you look at the school budget. The school budget in Milford, I think it comprises a little over 50%
Right.
of our annual budget. That's huge. It's absolutely huge. And like I say, to see that streamlined a little bit would really probably go a long way to make things easier on the leadership in the town to
Exactly.
be able to budget appropriately and be able to count on certain aspects of the money coming through in a timely manner. Let's talk a little bit more about entitlements. Existing rule enforcement in the welfare. Do you have anything you'd like to expand on that a little bit more?
And I'd recap what I said earlier. You know, obviously a person who is committing fraud is stealing at least twice, if not more. I think, you know, along with the obligation, the moral obligation to help support the needy and the less fortunate in our society, comes an obligation not to throw that money around and not to behave loosely with it. We need to be very careful, and we need to enforce the rules as they are. And you read the press and, you know, realize that all journalism sometimes has some bias attached to it. But when you read some of the press reports, it would leave you with the impression that everyone who's receiving benefits, or a large majority of those receiving benefits, are doing so undeservedly. And I don't think that's the case. My own experience tells me that's not the case. And how do we get rid of that? How do you get rid of that perception? And I think the way you get rid of it is to enforce as much as possible and as publicly as possible those who try to beat the system, those who think they can beat the system. They're there. My experience as a law enforcement officer tells me that. I think we all know that anytime you have a system, people are going to try to beat it. You go back a year, just about a year now as we're taping this, and you look at the Marathon Fund, and as soon as the one fund sprung up, there were people who were submitting false claims, claiming
Sure.
they had relatives who were injured and died. And I mean, we could talk about the moral aspect of that and how despicable an act like that is, but the fact of the matter is, when you have any kind of system that's designed to be charitable, there are people who are going to feel their way free or see their way free to try to take that money, okay? I think the enforcement is a key part of this, and I think when you see enforcement, the enforcement does a number of things. It restores public confidence in the system. It makes people understand that the system is designed to help those that are less needy, and if someone tries to steal from it, we're going to come down on them come down on them hard. And there's always a deterrent value in any enforcement you do.
Sure.
If you enforce any kind of rule, a set of rules or anything like that, you would at least hope, and I think it goes without saying, that some people look at that and say, I'm not going to commit that crime, I'm not going to do that, because they're catching people who do that.
Right, and they're catching people, and those people are facing consequences.
Exactly.
And that's really important.
Yeah.
You know, there's a movie out that we want to, in addition to drinking liberally, there's a number of liberally organizations. There's Reading Liberally, there's Laughing Liberally, which is a comedy troupe that goes around the country telling jokes, basically. There's also Screening Liberally, and we have a chapter of Screening Liberally here in Milford. We watch movies that are not so much movies that are of a liberal bent, but the movies that might have a little bit of a political impact to them. Right. And we watch them and we have discussions about them afterwards. One of our proposed upcoming movies is The High Cost of Low Wages. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I've heard of it, but I've not seen it.
I haven't seen it either, and I really do want to see it. Like I said, we just saw Inequality for All this past weekend, which that's yet another one that's on our radar for Screening Liberally. But The High Cost of Low Wages deals specifically with issues around the minimum wage and how businesses that pay the minimum wage, well, you know, who are the real welfare queens, right? People talk about the welfare queens, the mythical welfare queens from the 80s, you know, collecting 50 different checks and driving Cadillacs, et cetera. The real welfare queens, it turns out, are those corporations that are making, you know, billions on their bottom line based on these low wages, based on paying very, very low wages to their employees. Things like, one of the things that's covered in the high cost of low wages is the fact that the Walton family, the people who own Walmart. They last year, they made $17 billion with a B dollars in gross profit. Had they paid their workers an adequate salary and provided them with benefits, they still would have made $12 billion.
And it's important to note two things about the Walton family and Walmart. Walmart is not a publicly held corporation, so there is no shareholder-driven economics going on there. It's held by more or less the Walton family and a few other people. So when you look at how that $17 billion with a B is split up, it's split up amongst a very small group of people that are already very, very wealthy. There is no shareholder board to report to. And when you look at them, they are probably the leader in if you can describe them as the leader, they are the leading retailer, I think, in the United States. And if I'm correct, I'm not sure, I think they're the leading retailer in the world. But they do that at the expense of their workers. They constantly keep wages low. In their stores at Christmas time, they hold food drives for their own employees who are working full time.
Yep.
Okay, I've heard the figure bandied about in a number of studies that $8 billion in benefits goes to people who work at Walmart. So people who are working at Walmart, who are trying to be part of the economy and who are underemployed, to use a term, are collecting $8 billion in benefits. So when you look at, you asked a minute ago, who are the welfare queens, you look at who is subsidizing that. We are, as taxpayers, we're subsidizing that. If Walmart can get away with paying a substandard wage, and it's not just Walmart, we're using that as an example, there are other employers.
There are plenty of others.
There are plenty of other employers as well.
Yeah.
If they can get away with paying wages so low that a full-time worker there has to apply for benefits to feed his family, that's our tax money. And you hear an awful lot about welfare fraud and entitlement, and we've covered it adequately here tonight, but when you look at it, who's taking more out of the public pocket? Is it someone who has a false EBT card or applied under false pretenses, or is it a large multinational employer that's paying their employees' wages so low that they have to rely on charity to feed their family?
Yeah. Well, it was kind of a moment a little while ago when they cut food stamps. They tried to cut $8 billion out of food stamps. Walmart's share price tumbled.
Right.
Because so many people use their EBT cards at Walmart.
At Walmart, exactly.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Walmart also, I believe, they supply something along the lines of 30% of the groceries in this country right now because they have so many locations and they've added groceries to all those locations. Back in the 40s, A&P, the Great Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, A&P was sued back in the 40s to bust them up because they were providing at that time 20% of the groceries, of the food that people were eating, and the government actually busted up their chain because they felt that we were putting too many eggs in one basket. Right. So it's really kind of a strange thing. McDonald's is another case in point where McDonald's had advice to employees about how to make ends meet.
Correct. How to apply for public benefits.
How to apply
right.
for public benefits, exactly.
And a lot of people, the arguments you hear against increasing the minimum wage, John, you'll hear that it's teenage workers scooping ice cream. And you'll hear that it's just part-time jobs while someone's in high school or college or things like that. And then you look at the statistics. Minimum wage earner in Massachusetts, the average one is female, 33 years old, and employed full-time. You know, we talk about a dollar amount being too much to scoop ice cream. I've seen Facebook posts and things to that, you know, you shouldn't be paid more than $8 an hour to scoop ice cream. That was the minimum wage 6 years ago. Yeah. The cost of living goes up about 2.5% a year. You need to roll that out and do the math. But $8 an hour in 2008 bought much, much less than $8, rather much, much more, I should say, than $8 an hour buys today,
Sure.
okay? Inflation eats up all of our wages. I think most people that work at jobs have some mechanism where they get pay increases, but when the economy is tilted towards the employer as badly as it is now, it's difficult for that to occur.
Sure, and I mean, just do the math. $8 an hour, even $8.25 an hour,
Right.
times 40 hours, is what, $320, $330 a
Right.
week?
Right.
$16,000 a year? I couldn't imagine trying to live on $16,000.
I couldn't imagine trying to feed a family on that, John.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, there really does need to be something done about the minimum wage and increasing it just to force things to be a little bit better.
Right.
You know, again, it's that virtuous cycle. I can't recommend it highly enough. Inequality for All talked about the virtuous cycle going this way, where the economy improves and, you know, everything goes. You know, it's just a cycle that makes things better all the time. Things are always getting better, versus the vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle is where things get a downturn, where, you know, wages depress people and people, you know, the tax collections go down because people aren't making as much money and people get laid off and they need their unemployment benefits, which takes more out of the government. And, you know, the vicious cycle goes this way, the virtuous cycle goes this way, and we really do need to restore that virtuous cycle. We have to do something.
If you can inject money into the economy at the bottom, as I stated before, that money is going to get spent in the retail sector. A lot of it may even get spent right at the employee's place,
Sure.
particularly at an employer like Walmart or McDonald's.
Right.
Some of that
Right.
money is going to come right back. Again, Henry Ford's maxim,
Yeah.
pay your employees enough they can afford to buy your product, and you
Right.
give your own economy a boost at the same time, get a large amount of your money back.
One of my favorite maxims from Henry Ford also was concerned the color of the Model T.
Any color you want, as long as it's black.
As long as it's black.
They used to be Harley Davidson's motto as well, right?
Yeah, Henry Ford did have some great ideas, though, and among them was that perfect maxim of, you know, I need to pay my guys well enough that they can buy my cars.
Right.
That just makes just absolute awesome sense. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the volunteerism and charity work that you do. You mentioned earlier, just briefly, that you volunteered at a food pantry.
I do, yes, in Douglas. I have for a number of years. I do that with my family. I even put my kids to work.
Good.
I have my wife does probably more than I do now, but we do work there. I'm involved in an initiative in Douglas to try to feed the hungry. It's going to be, we're going to try to grow some produce and look at some interesting ways to grow produce all year round.
Okay.
That can be used to feed the hungry as well. And really anything that I can, I try to jump on board if it's to help the less fortunate.
Uh-huh. Now, do you have a farmer's market in Douglas? We just
There
started
is a farmer's market in Douglas. Yes, I'm not too familiar with it yet, but we've talked about it, and I know the initiative growing food, I know, is going to end up there.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, we just started one of those here in Milford, and I actually serve as vice president of the Milford Farmers Market Association.
Good.
It's a great fun. It really is. Every Saturday morning we get out and we have a blast.
Yes.
You know, we have our regular customers, we have people who know us and who are looking for us. We have our regular vendors, and we have some of the best produce, I'll tell you. There's a place called the Pumpkin Farm out in Medway. They bring peaches, or they brought peaches last August. They were the best I'd ever had in my life, honestly. D'Alessandro's Farm out of Bellingham. They brought the greatest corn, just tremendous. And they had a bunch of other stuff too. They had these little Japanese eggplants.
Yep.
Those skinny. They were selling for $0.25 a piece.
Oh, that's
You know,
wonderful.
I felt like I was back in the 70s. You know,
And
it's
food
just-
pantries and the farmers market, I mean, they rely on the charity of a lot of people.
Sure.
Not only the workers. I don't want to, be anti-corporation or anything like that. There are a lot of corporations that support food pantries.
Oh, yeah.
And they make our work much easier, and it would be difficult to feed hungry people if you didn't have their
Right.
support.
Right. We do a canned food drive for the food pantry.
Yes.
We only started our farmers market last August, so
Okay.
we haven't even had a full season. Okay,
Right.
but we did one weekend have a canned food drive. We're going to have at least one more canned food drive this year. This year we're going to have a full season. We're going to start in June and go until early October. So we're really looking forward to that. But yeah, we did a canned food drive for the food pantry. We're also talking with soup kitchens in the area to
Yes.
take the leftover produce at the end of the day, the stuff that didn't sell, if there's stuff that didn't sell. Our first weekend, we sold everything out by 11 o'clock. There was nothing left, because nobody was really sure how successful it would be, and boy, was it successful. So
the demand is certainly there.
Yeah.
The need is there, the demand is there, and I think we could set up a lot more organizations. We could do a lot more work, and I don't think we'd take too much of a piece out of the demand.
Yeah. Certainly, we need to try and make sure that people can get fed correctly.
Exactly.
And get good, nutritious food too.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm very concerned about too is carbon footprint. I'm very green. I sell solar power for my living. That's what I do. I've been very environmentally conscious my whole life. My dad instilled in me a love for the environment. He was so proud of me. I participated in the first Earth Day. Back when I was in 8th grade.
Good. Excellent.
Long time ago now. Yes. But I've always tried to be environmentally conscious, and just carbon footprint. You go to the grocery store and you look at the stuff. Product of Chile, product of New Zealand, product of all over the place.
Right.
What's the carbon cost of shipping all that food on a slow boat from China?
And what's the harm to our economy too? I mean, if we could possibly buy American, I realize that with growing seasons and things the way they are, it's more difficult to do. But when we import that's $1 that's sent back to Chile or back to Argentina that's not sent to a farm in America. Let alone in Massachusetts.
I carry a ton of bumper stickers on the back of my truck. I'm well known in Milford as the guy with all the bumper stickers. And one of them says, "Break the chains," and there's a picture of a chain being broken.
Right.
And it says, "Shop at independent stores."
Right.
And that's why with Drinking Liberally, that's why I insisted we had to go to a local tavern, the Turtle Tavern. We weren't going to go to a chain. We weren't going to go to one of those chain restaurants. No, let's go to a local establishment that will really appreciate us. And boy, do they.
Right.
We show up twice a month on a Wednesday night with 20, 30 people ordering dinner and drinks for hours.
They're happy to see you.
They are happy to see us, and they really do appreciate it. And it's great to.
Anytime you can support a local merchant, I think your money's well spent.
Absolutely.
And if you stop looking at it and maybe price differences and things like that, and I'm not talking great differences in price or anything like that, but if you can support a local merchant, I think that comes back. It comes back to the community.
Talking with Jim and Heidi over at the Turtle, one of their major complaints is that these big chain restaurants can come into town, and they can offer things like prime rib for $8.95.
Right.
Well, he can't compete with prime rib for $8.95.
Right.
He's got ambiance and he's got a nice tavern and he has 18 different beers on tap, but he can't compete with prime rib for $8.95.
Right.
And so, but the thing that they do is they come in and they offer these specials, and before you know it, Jim's out of business. And now these chains are the only game in town. Are they going to keep selling prime rib at $8.95 when they're the only game in town? But it seems like it's unfair, and so that's why I go out of my way to make sure that I support local businesses.
Yes,
absolutely. So we're almost out of time here. Let's talk a little bit more about how people can find you, what the district is that you're running, et cetera. Let's just get a last message in for the viewers.
I'm running in the 18th Worcester District. It comprises the towns of Douglas, Sutton, Webster, and 2 precincts in Oxford. You can find me on Facebook, Elect David Cortese, and you can find me on the web at votedavidcortese.com.
All right, terrific. David, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really appreciate you
being here.
Thank you
for the opportunity. I appreciate it.
I'm glad that you were here. It was a great episode, and I hope that the viewers get a lot out of it. So we'll be getting this out onto the air shortly in the district, and perhaps you could even help me get it onto a couple of the towns that I'm not in. I'm in 2 of your towns right now, but I'm not in Webster and I'm not in Oxford. So perhaps you can
I'll certainly do anything I can to help, John.
All right, terrific.
All right.
You've been watching All Politics is Local, a production of the Greater Blackstone Valley Democrats. To learn more about the Greater Blackstone Valley Dems, visit our website at www.gbvdems.org. Tonight we had David Cortese on the show. It was great having a good conversation about where the 18th Worcester is going to be going in the future. We'll see what happens in September and we'll see what happens in November. Thanks for tuning in. Good night.